I hope it will benefit the people in China. In his book, 41, A Portrait of My Father, the president's son, George W. Bush, wrote of how his dad tried to live out a principled and restrained style of leadership.
Preach the sermon daily, and if necessary, use words. It summarizes the man.
In 1990, President Bush and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev forged an agreement on the U.S.-Soviet Chemical Weapons Accord and the signing of the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty known as START, setting in motion an unprecedented reduction of nuclear arsenals for both nations. But Bush 41 was still fighting a domestic perception gained on the campaign trail, that of a wealthy, privileged bureaucrat who was soft. Panama would be his first test. In December 1989, he ordered more than 27,000 U.S. troops to invade Panama to depose General Manuel Noriega, who was said to be threatening the security of Americans living there. Hundreds of Panamanians died. But his greatest military test came when Iraqi President Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990. Bush rallied 34 nations to send hundreds of thousands of troops to Iraq, forming Operation Desert Storm. They launched an air war, followed by a brief ground assault, ending in a decisive victory for the coalition. A year later, Bush ran for re-election, but a faltering economy and a broken promise on preventing tax hikes led to his loss to Democrat Bill Clinton in 1992. It was that loss that emboldened two of his sons to run for public office. Bush 41's presidency spawned an American political dynasty that continues to this day. Jessica Stone, CGTN, Washington.
The theme of World AIDS Day is Know Your Status. South Africa has the largest number of people living with HIV in the world, but millions of South Africans still don't know their status. CGTN's Yolissa and Jamela spoke to one South African who's been diagnosed HIV positive about some of the challenges that she has overcome.
South Africa has over 5 million people living with HIV, and over 2 million of them are on antiretroviral medication. 30-year-old Pindile Mulotsane is one of them. She's been living with HIV for 18 years. She discovered her status just after giving birth to her second child.
I was in complete denial until 2013 when I became quite ill. That's when I started seeking medical help, and I also received counseling. At that point, I had to accept my status and take medication. It was not easy, but I realized that I needed to do so to be well.
Mulotsane says one of the biggest challenges of being diagnosed HIV positive is the stigma attached to the virus.
Some community members would point at me as the person who has AIDS. I had to teach them that I'm living with HIV. I don't have AIDS. I also had to teach them that not everyone contracts HIV because they have been sexually promiscuous. Some of the people are born with it. But all those messages were falling on deaf ears.
The young woman joined the Treatment Action Campaign, a non-governmental organization set up in 1998 to promote access to HIV treatment.
I then started interacting with other activists. I was then able to deal with stigma issues. I just really turned them into teaching opportunities. Teaching people about finding out about their status and taking medication so that they can live positively. Now people are able to speak to me, even those who are still in denial about their status. I'm able to help them deal.
South Africa has made significant progress in the fight against HIV. In 2017 alone, the country reached the first of the 90-90-90 targets introduced by the United Nations. 90-90-90 hopes that by 2020, 90% of people who are infected with HIV will be diagnosed. 90% of those living with HIV will be on antiretrovirals, and 90% of those on treatment will be virally suppressed. Yolissa and Jamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Moving to West Africa now, where Nigeria's Strong Girls Network organised an anti-sugar daddy conference to educate young girls on sex education and HIV/AIDS to mark World AIDS Day.
These young girls are taking notes at an anti-sugar daddy conference in the Nigerian city of Ibadan. It's aimed at raising awareness on transactional sex as part of the World AIDS Day commemoration. Wealthy older men spending vast amounts of money on younger women has become a phenomenon in Nigeria, where the term sugar daddy is a symbol of prestige for teenage girls trapped in a toxic cycle of poverty and ignorance.
Girls are having sex with men that are twice their age, men that are 10 times older than them. And the thing is, when you're in such relationships, you do not have any opportunity to call the shots. You can't say, I'm sorry, I would like to use a condom. I'm sorry, I can't do this. Because this man is automatically paying you in return with either money, love, affection, or gifts.
Nigeria has the highest HIV rate in Western Central Africa, with around 3.5 million people infected with the virus, according to data from the United Nations AIDS program. About 100 girls attended the conference and then got tested for HIV.
My mom called me to come check my HIV status and to be more enlightened about HIV and AIDS. And I think that is what all parents should do. Instead of being strict to their children and all, they should teach them.
The event was organized by the Strong Girl Network, which launched last year, and since then it has reached more than 5,000 girls and continues to provide safe spaces for young women to learn about sex education and HIV/AIDS without fear of discrimination. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
In Rwanda, a new self-testing HIV kit has been launched. It enables people to check their status in the privacy of their homes, as it uses saliva rather than blood. The kit has a 99.7% accuracy rate. Let's take a look.
It's easy to use. All you do is swab your gums for a saliva sample, then place it in the solution. 20 minutes later, you know your HIV status. The arrival of OraQuick testing kit in Rwanda is being hailed as a milestone in the fight against the HIV pandemic.
It is one way to make sure that people have access to HIV testing. And as we know that HIV testing is an entry point to the HIV prevention in general, and it is an entry point for long-term HIV care and treatment. So we find it necessary to make sure that the test is accessible and people, they know their HIV status so they can take appropriate strategies according to their HIV result.
It grants users much needed privacy, allowing those who want to know their status to do so behind closed doors. Another unique feature is that OraQuick searches for the virus in saliva rather than blood.
I think that by the time someone makes the decision to use a self-testing kit, then they have already counseled themselves that this is the right thing to do and have the courage to get tested.
Rwanda's HIV/AIDS prevalence is at 3%. Ahead of World AIDS Day, the government is distributing OraQuick kits free of charge.
I'd say that OraQuick is good, is an interesting tool. We're still concerned with the access cost. If the tests at the factory is accessed at $2 for public programs, $4 for non-public, for private. To me, looking at who needs it is still a major barrier to scale. Probably keep discussing with the manufacturers and also the programs and funders how we can do better on access part of it.
Usually the kit goes for around $5 in the market. Astatal, CGTN.
Well, we continue our coverage of World AIDS Day, and James Kamau is a health activist and CEO at Kenya Treatment Access Movement. Welcome very much to come in for Africa Live. Right, the recent UN AIDS report still shows Sub-Saharan Africa as the most effective region. Is there anything good coming out of what governments and health organizations are doing about how to treat HIV?
Yes, the Sub-Saharan Africa actually takes the bulk of all HIV, total HIV infections in the world. But there is a lot of good that it's coming in. One, the level of investment, even by the governments, the domestic funding has raised up. And I think the push for reduction has really come up. When you look at Africa itself, the uptake of ARVs or ART is very high. And we are all aware that once you are on antiretroviral, then it's because you get to an undetectable level. And we have what you call U equals U, which is undetectable, untransmittable. So yes, a lot of good is coming in. And also, the stigma, even though high, is coming down. And most people are also now coming out, and we're being able to capture them.
Okay. Well, the report also revealed that currently only 75% of people living with HIV actually know their situation. So obviously 25% ignore it, and as a result they don't have access to antiretroviral therapy. What do you think is the best way to encourage people to find out, to test and know their status?
Okay, one, some of them do, most of the, yes, we have a lot of people out there who don't know their status. This is by estimates if you look at the issue. It's a bit difficult because sometimes one can live with the virus and live healthily without them knowing. But yes, as we are going out there, we are doing it. I'll be more specific. For example, Kenya right now, we are undertaking a survey known as KENFIA, which stands for Kenya Population-Based HIV Impact Assessment. And it's gone out into the counties everywhere in the random. It's a random survey. And the demand for testing has started coming up. So I think one of the things to capture those 25% is to take the services to the people, just like we have done in KENFIA, because the people now, you are not interrupting their day-to-day. You have actually brought the service to them and they know it. And I think it's very important. Secondly, also, if we encourage the populations to go and give out blood, then for life, which we have a shortage of life-saving blood, at the same time they can know their status, so they'll be doing too. So we need to have innovative ways of coming up so that we capture those people, because some of them don't even know they're there.
Okay, and lastly, well, let's talk more generally about HIV in Africa. How much aid is being given to the continent, and would you say it's increasing or decreasing in view of various changes happening politically on the continent?
Wow. Well, a lot of aid is being given. The UN estimated that by 2017, 21.3 billion US dollars was available. And majority of that money was available to, or was used in low and middle income countries, like my country, which is a middle income country, Kenya. But yes, and we have also noticed that local or domestic funding in these countries has increased by about 56%. But definitely we will need to do more, because we now are entering what we call a dwindling era of funds coming down. And we need to start putting in more funding. We also need, and to do that, we need to start looking at HIV from a socio-economic point of view, not just a disease. Mm-hmm. What is the impact? And how does it come, especially in this era of universal health coverage, which we are doing?
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming in. James Kamau there, a health activist and CEO at Kenya Treatment Access Movement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Global health experts are urging the Trump administration to allow US government disease experts to work in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Statements in 2 prestigious medical journals call on the US to reconsider its security policy after the Ebola outbreak turned into the second largest in history. Well, prior to this plea, our Washington correspondent Daniel Rinches questioned one of America's foremost government experts on disease management, Dr. Anthony Fauci, about the issue.
There has been reporting about the fact that the Americans are not, as it were, authorized to go to the region because of safety concerns from the US government. In the West Africa major outbreak, there were many American personnel on the ground. Does that mean for people in the region that they should not feel reassured that sufficient resources are on the ground right now?
Well, there are resources on the ground, but they're being implemented by the Congolese. You said correctly that the State Department, our ambassador in the State Department, has the ultimate say and decision because they're responsible for the safety of U.S. government employees, be they people from USAID, the CDC, the NIH, and others. They're responsible for the safety of those U.S. government people. And they have determined that at the present time, it is not safe for those individuals to go up into the area of Beni in the northeastern part of the country because of what we're seeing on a daily basis, which is violence and killing.
But there are others willing to put their...
Yeah, there are people that are already up there. So see, the way it works is that when you come in to try and partner with a country like DRC, you help train their personnel to be able to give the vaccines, to do the contact tracing, and to do the clinical trial. You have to point out that the DRC, apart from any help that we give them, are quite experienced and competent in taking care of an outbreak. So this is their 10th outbreak that they've experienced since 1976, when the first outbreak was reported from the DRC. So they have good experience, but even with their experience, it's difficult when you're dealing with a zone that is a combat zone, a zone that has a great deal of instability and one that is fraught with danger.
And one where many people are totally distrustful of any outside elements, even from their own country coming in, and telling them even that Ebola exists, that these vaccines are something that could really help them.
It's very challenging from a number of standpoints. One, as you mentioned correctly, a distrust of authority, different factions that don't trust each other, ongoing violence. It makes it extremely challenging to address and contain an outbreak that even under the best of circumstances would be challenging.
Dr. Fauci, thank you very much for talking to us today.
You're very welcome. Good to be with you.
Well, we are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
To a developing story now, the Confederation of African Football has stripped Cameroon of the hosting rights for the 2019 African Cup of Nations. The decision was arrived at during a CAF Executive Committee meeting in the Ghanaian capital, Accra. This is due to serious delays with its preparations and in the midst of a violent separatist rebellion near two of the planned venues. CAF President Ahmed has announced that a new bidding process is to be opened. Countries have until the end of December to submit bids. The tournament starts in June.
In light of all the reports which we have received and also having analysed the evolution of events, we have taken the decision to take the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations away from Cameroon. But against that, the CAF makes a commitment to support Cameroon, to give time to Cameroon so that it can prepare well for another Africa Cup of Nations in the future. Obviously, there are immediate consequences.
Well, for more on this, let's now go live to CGTN Sadiq Shaban, who is in Accra for us. What reasons did CAF give for the withdrawal of hosting rights to Cameroon for AFCON?
Well, Karen, CAF increasingly grew impatient with Cameroon's slow progress in preparing facilities for next year's tournament. The Executive Council, the Executive Committee is saying yesterday that there would be no plan B for this tournament, and if Cameroon is not ready, then they were going to deny them the opportunity to host next year's event. But beyond this, there are those who also say the crisis in the restive Anglophone regions of Cameroon could have played a part in the decision by CAF to strip Cameroon of hosting rights for the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations, particularly the new stadium that is in Douala, which is about 70 kilometers away from the northwest south of Cameroon.
So, Sadiq, what next for the 2019 tournament?
Karen, we've heard overnight that a number of countries have already expressed interest in hosting the 2019 tournament. We've heard that Morocco will could be launching a bid for this tournament just recently after losing out on the 2026 World Cup bidding rights. We've also heard that South Africa could be throwing interest in hosting this tournament. But then again, CAF has given 30 days for candidates, prospective countries, to snap up the chance to host 2019 Africa Cup of Nations. We are not sure whether we're going to see joint bids or countries like Morocco, for instance, to snap up the chance. But that CAF says the process will be transparent and every step of the way will be known in the coming days.
And finally, Sadiq, what's been the reaction from Cameroon on all of this?
We've been speaking to the officials of Cameroon's FECAFOOT Normalization Committee, and they have expressed their disappointment with the decision that's been taken by CAF. They say the president of CAF, Ahmed, flew into Cameroon in October and personally assured the president of Cameroon, Paul Biya, that Cameroon's hosting rights were intact. During the visit by the inspection team and the security team, Cameroon say they made good presentations and made assurances that the stadium will be ready by June next year. But with this, CAF did not give Cameroon more consideration, and Cameroon say they feel dejected, they feel disappointed, and CAF made it clear that Cameroon has a chance to bid for future tournaments. So it's not very clear whether they will go for 2021 because this has already been taken up by Côte d'Ivoire, and 2023 edition, which has already been taken up by Guinea. So Cameroon is back to the drawing board, thinking about their options at this point, but CAF has made it open that they will work on Cameroon should they feel that they are ready to host future African Cup of Nations tournaments.
Okay, thank you for that update. That was CGTN Sadiq Shaban there in Accra for us. Moving on to other news now. The Electoral Commission in the Democratic Republic of Congo says it has acquired all the polling material it requires to organise elections this December. The DRC government rejected financial assistance from Western powers who were willing to help fund its election. Congolese army trucks have now begun dispatching electoral materials across the country. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more.
The start of campaigns in Kinshasa is exciting many supporters of presidential candidates contesting the December elections. The election has been delayed for 2 years because President Kabila remained in office after the expiry of his mandate in 2016. But preparations for holding the polls are in full flow now. The government has bought army trucks to transport the election materials across the country. And the DRC's Independent National Electoral Commission says it's ready to organize the vote.
La CENI a son plan.
CENI's operational plans for the elections are on course. We've acquired all the materials for the polling stations.
According to the United Nations, the DRC has a population of 80 million people, the majority of whom live in poverty. Many Congolese citizens want the next leader to improve the economy and uphold democratic principles.
We will be happy to get a president who will restore security, improve the healthcare system, and provide better salaries for workers.
We young people want a leader who will maintain democracy.
Candidates are now traveling around the DRC seeking to win over voters ahead of the December 23rd elections. But some opposition members are calling for a boycott of the polls over the electronic voting machines, which they claim will be used to rig the vote. An allegation the Electoral Commission has denied. 21 candidates originally registered for the polls, but 3 of them stood down to allow colleagues from the opposition to stand forward. The front-runners are the opposition's Martin Fayulu, Felix Tshisekedi, and the ruling party's Emmanuel Ramazani Shadari. Chris Chamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
The US military says it killed 11 al-Qaeda-linked militants by conducting an airstrike over Libyan territory. The US Africa Command says the strike was coordinated with the Libyan government of national accord. From Washington, Daniel Renches reports.
The US Africa Command airstrike near Al-Awaynat appears to have been an attack on a convoy of vehicles. The US says 11 members of the group Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb were killed and that 3 vehicles were destroyed. The US adds that it currently assesses that there were no civilian casualties. The US defines this as a single airstrike, but there may have been multiple missiles fired in the attack. It was coordinated with the Libyan government of national accord. AFRICOM says it will use precision strikes to deny terrorists safe haven in Libya going forward. The US says this is the 3rd time it struck the group in Libya, and it's committed to continuing to apply pressure on the network. Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State have developed strong networks in the country, taking advantage of the continuing instability since the toppling of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Daniel Renches, CGTN, Washington.
Let's now take a look at other news making headlines from around the world, and we start in Alaska, where back-to-back earthquakes have shattered highways and rocked buildings in the US state's largest city, Anchorage. The 7.0 and 5.7 magnitude quakes triggered a warning to residents to flee to higher ground for fear of a tsunami. The warning was lifted without incident a short time later. There were no immediate reports of any deaths or serious injuries. Ukraine will not allow Russian men aged between 16 to 60 into the country following the imposition of martial law. President Petro Poroshenko said the ban was designed to prevent the formation of private armies in the country. Russia's foreign ministry responded to the temporary ban on Friday, criticizing Ukraine leadership and saying it would not reciprocate. Meanwhile, on Thursday, Ukrainian armed forces carried out tactical drills near the Azov Sea coast as tensions between the two countries soar. Those moves came as Poroshenko voiced fears of a Russian invasion after Russian forces fired on and seized 3 Ukrainian boats and 24 sailors. South Korea and the DPRK have moved a step closer to linking up their railway systems. A train carrying South Korean engineers and officials crossed into the DPRK on Friday to begin an 18-day joint survey. The train will travel along 1,200 kilometers of track along the east and west of the DPRK. The joint inspection is part of efforts to implement the Panmunjom Declaration issued by President Moon Jae-in and Chairman Kim Jong-un at their summit in April. Well, it's now time for a break. We've got all the business news coming up, including the United States, Canada and Mexico sign trade agreements amid tensions.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
The leaders of Canada, Mexico and the United States have signed the replacement for the North American Free Trade Agreement. The ceremony took place at the G20 summit. Donald Trump says the US-Mexico-Canada agreement is much better than NAFTA, but as CGTN's Owen Fairclough reports, one of his key partners isn't so sure.
A new chapter in North American trade signed in southernmost South America at the G20 summit in Argentina.
This is a model agreement that changes the trade landscape forever. And this is an agreement that, first and foremost, benefits working people.
The United States-Mexico-Canada agreement replaces the North American Free Trade Agreement. It had transformed the trade of everything from avocados to the Zacaton root used to make brushes. Trump claimed NAFTA put Americans out of work with unfair trade practices.
It's one of the worst deals I've ever seen.
So how different is USMCA?
The goal of the Trump administration, their stated goal, is to bring back auto manufacturing to the United States.
And that means increasing how much of a vehicle's content must be made in its country of origin. Under NAFTA, it was just over 60%. Now it's 75%. When NAFTA took effect during the early days of the internet in 1994, there were no e-commerce rules. USMCA has a whole chapter on it. And NAFTA all but fenced off Canada's dairy industry from competition. Now US rivals will have greater access to its market. But if Trump says he's protecting American auto workers, Canada's Prime Minister was quick to remind him that automaker GM had only a few days ago announced it's cutting 14,000 jobs in both countries.
The recent plant closures by General Motors, which affects thousands of Canadian and American workers and their families, are a heavy blow. Make no mistake, we will stand up for our workers and fight for their families and their communities. And Donald, it's all the more reason why we need to keep working to remove the tariffs on steel and aluminum between our countries.
And while Mexico expects those metal tariffs to be lifted now this new deal is in place, it isn't clear when that might happen for Canada. It appears there are limits to free trade, two words conspicuously absent from USMCA's title. USMCA took more than a year of often bitter negotiations and has to be ratified by each country's legislature. But for the US, there's a crucial get out, a sunset clause that means this trade pact is up for renegotiation in 16 years' time. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Well, at the G20 summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping is scheduled to meet US President Donald Trump to discuss trade issues. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said Beijing hopes Washington can show its sincerity and work with China to yield positive outcomes.
中美经贸合作的本质是互利共赢的。
The nature of the economic and trade relationship between China and the US is mutually beneficial. Now the economic teams of the two sides are in close contact over implementing the agreement reached between the leaders of the two countries during their phone conversation on October 1st. We hope the US will show its sincerity and work with China for a plan that is acceptable to both sides. Meanwhile, we also hope that with joint efforts of the two sides, the upcoming leaders' meeting in Argentina will have positive outcomes and point to the direction of future bilateral relations.
The President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, is in Buenos Aires for the G20 summit. He told a press conference that the Brexit deal reached with British Prime Minister Theresa May is the best option, but the EU is ready for anything that happens.
If this deal is rejected in the Commons, we are left with, as was already stressed a few weeks ago by Prime Minister May, an alternative. No deal or no Brexit at all. I want to reassure you that the EU is prepared for every scenario.
Speaking about the rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine, Tusk said the European Union supports Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. He called Russia's use of force against Ukrainian Navy vessels totally unacceptable. He said the EU would extend its economic sanctions on Russia next month. On to Kenya now, where a delegation of Chinese business people is exploring investment opportunities in the country. The group is led by the chairperson of the Council for Promoting South-South Cooperation. They've attended a forum hosted by Kenya's Export Promotion Council in Nairobi. CGTN's Robert Nagila has that report.
China is Kenya's largest trading partner, investor and contractor. The two countries have cooperated on more than 100 major projects, including the flagship standard gauge railway line. Now, Kenya is looking for investment in manufacturing and housing.
The president of China has said that he's opening up Chinese market for our products. And for Kenya, we have the Big Four agenda, and our president has been in the forefront in seeing that we have market access to China. So the Big Four agenda focuses on the manufacturing sector, among others.
China has welcomed the forum, saying it will improve investors' understanding of the business climate in Kenya.
This forum is important to get to know the investment opportunities in Kenya, because for a company willing to invest in a foreign country, information is key, so that Chinese investors can get the necessary information.
After 40 years hard working, China becomes the second largest economy in the world, the largest trade partner in the world, and also have the import and export of goods have grown 198 times.
China has listed Kenya as an example of the success of China-Africa Industrial Cooperation. Chinese enterprises have invested billions of dollars in research, industrial zones and development projects in the country. And Kenya is ready for more.
We are happy to assist all the Chinese companies. When they come, we are situated at UAP building on the 15th floor, and we have a one-stop shop available and ready and working to facilitate the ease of Chinese companies and foreign and local companies to establish their businesses in Kenya.
This forum is a follow-up on the Shanghai Expo, with emphasis on trade policies and investment strategies to attract Chinese investment. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
South Sudan is planning to launch its first mobile money service by January 2019. Juba says the platform will make it easier to do business and support the economy while the country is rebuilding itself. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
Trinity Technologies is set to provide the mobile money service. It's not a telecommunications company, so will use other firms operating in the country, such as South Africa's MTN and financial institutions, to manage the platform.
This project is going to generate a lot of employment in the country. It is going to stimulate the economy. And like I already told, it is also going to breed a lot of young entrepreneurs in the country.
Mobile money transactions will allow people to pay bills and access loans, insurance and savings from their phones, rather than going into a financial institution in person to complete extensive paperwork. The government says it will also reduce the risk people face carrying around huge sums of cash.
Financial services ecosystem in the country will really improve, because now we will capture a lot of the people who are not bank, because the transaction within the mobile money, it will be really for those small people who are selling the tomatoes and the onions in the market.
Mobile money has been revolutionizing financial services on the continent, especially in East Africa. One challenge in South Sudan, however, is the poor telecommunications network. Much of the infrastructure has been destroyed during the war, but the government says it's working with the companies to expand telecoms networks and roll out the service to as many people as possible. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Several thousand people have taken to the streets of Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou, in protest over high fuel prices. Petrol and diesel prices have shot up 12% over the past 3 weeks. Protesters are also demanding the scrapping of a bill that would curtail the right to strike. The government has blamed rising fuel prices on international markets, as well as the need for increased revenue to fight terrorism. However, world oil prices have plunged around 30% as worries about falling demand in a slowing world economy have taken their toll. Well, we are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including South Africa prepares for the Global Citizen Mandela 100 concert to be staged in Johannesburg on Sunday.
When you look at Africa, what do you really see? Do you see fast-growing, endless deserts and parched earth? Or do you see the biggest opportunity for an agricultural revolution in a generation? Do you see crowded, unplanned cities or vast, untapped markets? Do you see a population at risk? Or do you see a billion-strong opportunity to grow the next wave of multi-billion-dollar firms in Africa? When you look at Africa, what do you really see? Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
There's much excitement ahead of the Global Citizen Mandela 100 concert being staged in Johannesburg on Sunday. Global Citizen is an international movement that calls on world leaders to end extreme poverty and reduce inequality by 2030, in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The concert features a star-studded lineup of local and international artists. CGTN's Julie Sher now reports.
South Africans have wasted no time in taking up the challenge to become part of the global citizen movement. They've been hard at work in communities, holding leaders to account for the challenges faced by millions of people.
The response from South Africans has been absolutely overwhelming. It's the largest ever campaign we've ever initiated. Over 5 million actions have been taken by global citizens to earn tickets to the Global Citizen Festival. Because the thing that makes us unique is you can't buy a ticket, you have to earn it. Your social action is your currency.
Global Citizen encourages change through active citizenry. It's partnered with the Motsepe Foundation to bring the movement to South Africa in celebration of Nelson Mandela's centenary. The late statesman believed ending poverty was an act of justice, a vision the foundation shares.
The foundation, since its inception, we have focused on poverty alleviation. We work a lot with communities from very poor rural areas. We focus on sustainable projects that will help these communities to become self-reliant.
It's only right to fulfill his unfinished business and bring the Global Citizen movement in full force to South Africa with the largest ever Global Citizen Festival we've ever produced, headlined by the greatest artists in the world: Beyonce, Jay-Z, Coldplay, Pearl Jam, Ed Sheeran, Pharrell Williams, Femi Kuti, together with Tiwa Savage, Casper Neuvest, the greatest artists from across the continent and around the world, taking action in unison to see an end to extreme poverty.
South Africans will be rewarded for their good deeds on Sunday.
Doing good can be fun because people who are going to the stadium have earned their tickets to participate, to get to the stadium. So this is really exciting.
Everyone here is coming together and taking the action to work for the tickets and be involved in celebrating Madiba's 100 years. It also gives an important message at the same time. So you're getting to learn something and getting to be an activist at the same time, as well as engaging in such a special event.
Global citizens around the world have generated over 14 million actions in the last 6 years. It's prompted almost $40 billion in commitments to help tackle poverty in communities like these. South Africans will urge global leaders attending the concert to do the same. Julie Shara, CGTN, Tembisa Township, South Africa.
After the break, all the sport, including Cameroonians react to CAF's withdrawal of hosting rights for the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way.
Match Point, only on CGTN.
We begin in Cameroon, where people have reacted to the country being stripped of the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations. They now want the administrators to complete the construction of infrastructure to enable the country to bid for future tournaments.
Maybe it's a good decision, because instead of organising a discount AFCON, it's better to give it to someone who's ready, so Cameroon will have time to get ready and find the necessary means to think about organising an AFCON worthy of their name.
We already knew what had to happen. There is no stadium, there is no road, there is nothing. A country that is at war. We want to organise the AFCON. How? Logically, we could not make it clear. Cameroon could not organize the Africa Cup of Nations. It's clear because there is no infrastructure. There's no stadium, no road, no hotel, and no hospitals.
President Ahmad is someone who is really strict about these decisions. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. From the beginning, I knew he was going to withdraw the AFCON. There was nothing there. So I'm really very proud that we withdrew the AFCON in Cameroon. It's really going to make the Yaoundé government rethink. They're going to really get to work. Then we can organize it.
Meanwhile, the Confederation of African Football has opened up the bidding process to select a new host for the 2019 African Cup of Nations. Morocco and Egypt are reported to have expressed interest in hosting the 24-team event next June. CAF President Ahmed has been speaking on how the new host will be selected.
Devant cela, nous allons recruter dans les meilleurs délais un cabinet.
We will set up as soon as possible a committee with the task of choosing a country to organize the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations. We know there will not be many candidates, but we will leave the work to this committee to assess, to make the visits to the candidates, and before the end of the year, we are aiming for the end of the year to decide on the host country for the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations. This is without interrupting the talks about the works which Cameroon will undertake on the preparation of an Africa Cup of Nations, similarly with Cote d'Ivoire. So that is the decision that we have taken.
To the women's version of the event, and the 2018 Africa Women's Cup of Nations comes to a close this afternoon with the final between holders Nigeria and South Africa being played at the Accra Stadium. Banyana are upbeat about the opportunity of winning their first ever continental title after qualifying for what will be their first FIFA Women's World Cup in 2019. They're yet to lose a match in this tournament, their first match being a surprising 1-0 win over the Super Falcons of Nigeria in Group A. But Nigeria will be no pushover, having won the event 10 times. Coach Desiree Ellis and the team's captain have been speaking ahead of the final.
We've got to put our A game forward because you beat a team once, they're surely going to go out and make sure that you do not beat them again. So it's going to be a tough match, but the players will be up for it. We've got to bring our A game. We've got to make sure that we execute our plans.
We set small targets for ourselves and we have achieved every single one of those targets. Being top of our group, we've done that. Qualifying for the World Cup, we've done that. Now lifting that trophy and hanging that gold medal around our necks, and we are capable of doing that.
Meanwhile, Cameroon finished third in the tournament, taking the last of 3 slots to the 2019 FIFA Women's World Cup in France. The indomitable Lionesses dominated Mali 4-2 at the Cape Coast Stadium in the third-place playoff. Well, that's it for this edition of Africa Live. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on the screen and follow us on digital media platforms. Thank you for watching, and see you again a bit later.